When the busing gets you feeling good, some other time later, the busing gets boring and worsen, and that is none other than Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Let's break down this review on this podcast.
I scream, you scream for movies, and that's what we be doing.
What is good, movie fans? Welcome to I Screen, You Scream 4, number 4, 4 movies. I'm your host, Danny Escamlaji. As always, be sure to follow and subscribe to whatever you're listening on. And as always, leave me a 5-star review if you're enjoying this podcast. And not only that, but the episode as well, if you intend to enjoy this review of this episode. And none other than that, let's go ahead and get this review started. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire came out this past weekend, Friday, March 22nd. And I will say pretty much, I'm not sounding very exciting. Usually I would sound so hyped, so great. I mean, look, I'm gonna just be real. I'm just gonna keep it straight and possible and short and sweet. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is a movie that we all got our hopes up. That Ghostbusters Afterlife, which came out in 2021, was a delightful return form Ghostbusters film that captured its charm and brilliance to new generational fans and nostalgic fans all around the world. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case with Frozen Empire. And for many reasons, there's a lot to break down on why this movie isn't worth any time or disappointment to all Ghostbuster fans. Give my initial thoughts. Frozen Empire, I pretty much give it a 6 out of 10, 3 stars, for the fact that it has many issues going to this movie during this movie. And I was going in like, people, when reviews and reactions came out and they were super mixed, I'm starting to get the feel that I had a feeling that at this point this movie would just be different than Afterlife. And maybe I thought I had little expectations going forward to liking this movie, but unfortunately left me very desired to make me feel disappointed ever since I watched Afterlife. And Afterlife, I adored that movie. I even put this in my top 10 of 2021 films, which I do have an episode archived back a while ago. You'll have to find in the podcast, not on the YouTube, unfortunately. So go check that out if you haven't. Season 1. So Frozen Empire, like I said, has many issues. First off, I want to bring up the pacing to this movie. It's really so bad of a pacing, and just, I don't know how to explain so much on this film's pacing. I will say just the first act just gets me a little bored. And my eyes would barely be open during when I was watching it. And just waiting for the fun moment, the fun action, and I mean, look, I will say there were some, but then, getting to the main attraction, which is the main villain, let's say, it doesn't really get started until like near the end of the second act and all the way starting to the third climax. And that particularly, the third climax, was end up being shortened than I expected. So as I really soak it in, like the first the last 30 minutes of this movie, I end up feeling disappointed that it should have been like this fun, and it should have been like a little more like starting at the second act. That should have been really the main point of this kind of story. It's just to really get the second act going at start and just really fun. I mean, I just really felt disappointed going to this movie with just expectations of how this movie would show, but then really it just almost kept me bored for like the first entire movie, the first hour, and then 30-40 minutes later it just gets started. It's like, damn, I don't even know how to like say anything at this point. But just me though, I mean, no offense to everyone that either may enjoyed it or something, but it's just wasn't great to me with this pacing. The pacing was not the greatest thing in this movie that it had to offer, unfortunately. So pretty much that's like my biggest weakness. And there's a lot of other weaknesses to talk about as I talk about this on this episode. But on top of the pacing that also took away during the moments are the subplots of like, these interaction of characters. I mean, such as Trevor and Lucky, which they were from last movie. Would have been more interesting, and I would have liked this movie a little more if they just poured a little more attention to their chemistry. But unfortunately, the pacing of all that took away such charm, brilliance that they have from the last movie, and on top of that, there's a certain character that really kind of pulled my strings off a little bit, who I find it very unnecessary him being in the movie, regardless of the story, and that's no other than Kamal Najjani. I think pretty much his dialogue also kind of killed it a bit towards the climax, and something about this character, I mean, no offense to the actor, but it just kind of pulls away a little on my strings on on that character. And other than that, there's just no other complaints to everyone else that were from the last movie, of course. But pretty much, I think Kamal Nanjiani, I just find him very unnecessary to be in this movie for some reason, and the dialogue just doesn't feel like clever or funny from his part. I mean, the way how this movie, the way how this character was written, and through the script, just didn't bring me charm at all to this character at all. So that's the really most unfortunate part. Yes, you don't have Jason Reitman, who also happened to wrote the movie, but he directed the last movie. And I feel like with Jason Reitman, who is the son of Ivan Reitman, who did all the Ghostbusters movies in the past. I feel like from his father's touch to him, to Jason, he would have brought such more charm and just little more magic better in Frozen Empire if he did direct this movie. And unfortunately, Kill Gil Kean unfortunately just happened to direct this movie and kind of didn't do much magic than I thought it be. So I mean, that's the most unfortunate part. I feel like if Jason came back and directed this movie, it would have been on pacing with that last one, and it could have been pretty more interesting than not, to say the least. I mean, I don't know what else he could have done, but just making this more interesting and less boring of direction could have made this movie just a better up a score to me, and would have just be a little more interesting that I can enjoy this. However, I do have a good time with this movie in some aspects. Yes, the sense of nostalgia. You got Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Ernie Hudson, and I think they were just fun to watch and very nostalgic actors that appeared in the original Ghostbusters. And I know the other fourth member who passed away as an actor may not be the same, but I will say enjoying the three actors from from the generational Ghostbusters are just enjoyable. So that's a good sense of nostalgia. And of course, you can't have a Ghostbusters movie without the main theme song, which did play it towards the end of the movie, as always, which is the funnest part. I kind of get goosebumps every time I listen to this song in like any movie of a Ghostbusters. It feels so good. Busting makes me feel good. Busting feels good when you listen to the song. It just gets you in your tingling, gets everyone's tingling bodies every time. It brings me goosebumps. So at least it brought some great amount of nostalgia, which I do enjoy it a lot to this. And yes, I still enjoy these new generational characters. Yeah, you got Phoebe, you got Trevor, you got Gary. I mean, actors wise, let me just bring them up. McKenna Grace, Finn Wolfhard, Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd doesn't disappoint. At least I'll give him that. Paul Rudd, just every movie Paul Rudd is in, he's so good. No complaints. Carrie Coon on top of that, and Celeste O'Connell. Yeah, those are generational new Ghostbusters characters, and I will say, with them interacting and partnering up with the old Ghostbusters, it happens to be super interesting of a chemistry they have. So I do love the direction that they made these interactions happen with these characters and cast, especially with the last one. It was almost just good that the original Ghostbusters characters came towards the end and pulled through, and it was just still good seeing them together in this sequel. So that's a lot of sense I do enjoy when it comes to this movie's terms of nostalgia. Overall, I didn't really had much favor into this movie as I watched it, but towards the second act and the third, starting the third act, though it's short lived how the climax ended off, I still had a good time with some aspects of the good things, like characters, the action and the visuals are always good with these Ghostbusters movies. I could say that much, especially nowadays. And great characters, interactions, and decent performances coming off from like the get the generational Ghostbusters actors, Paul Rudd himself. I mean, there's not much to say towards the goodness thing. If this was Ghostbusters Afterlife I'm reviewing, I would have had a lot to talk about. But Frozen Empire, it just made me feel it's one of the most disappointing movies of the year to me. And it's not the worst, I could say that. If this was Madam Web, okay, long story short, I thank God I didn't see that movie. Anyways, but Frozen Empire, it just is one of the most disappointing movies. Not the worst of all time, but the most disappointing movies on my expectations of the year. So that flops under the radar to my least favorite movies of the year. So that kind of flopped a little bit to my expectations and it just didn't fulfill a lot to my heart of the last one. In Ghostbusters Afterlife, it was just the start of the new generation that brings newer audiences and Gen X's to trying out Ghostbusters, regardless of how old the IP is. And I will say it brings joy and families to come out. Even when I seen the movie, I seen families bringing kids, and because it has a good sense of light tone to this movie. So it's not these movies. It's not like it just be scary, but I mean scary in a way that's comedic, but then like I will say the tone in this movie got a little serious where it's a little hard for like kids to enjoy a bit. So I can see where the tone is coming from in the sequel. Forgot to mention and then the weaknesses. But I could still see families enjoying this either way and not care. But the people that enjoyed Afterlife and are fans would have a lot to say going forward to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire after coming off from Afterlife. And I hope everyone that enjoyed that watched Frozen Empire would either like it a little more than me or just I will say I promise that the mixed results are going to be the same with everyone. And that's just me coming off from like watching this movie and clearly looking at reactions and reviews to Frozen Empire. That seemed to be the case where it's almost unpleasant to enjoy this movie as much as the pacing goes. Now, if they happen to do a sequel, they could do it. They would just have to end off the franchise right away with the third. Truly, it's because I think they're running out of ideas to. I think personally, I think they're running out of ideas to how to bring more stories to like Ghostbusters lore. And I mean, all they can do is just cap it all off with the third and final film of the trilogy of the new generational Ghostbusters films, and then just end it off completely. I could see that truly happening, and I would love to see Jason Reitman return to taking the throne and made the magic happen with the third and final installment. I truly think they could do it, and Sony is going to obviously do it if successfully. If financially it's a success, we'll see where the legs goes. It actually made quickly box office top number made $45 million. No, excuse me, $44 million, a little above Afterlife, which is pretty good. So we'll see where the legs goes, but financially we'll see how it stands. But if they're going to do another sequel, I personally think they should cap it all off, bring Jason Reitman back, bring everyone else back, and just make it the last ride of Ghostbusters for like everyone to enjoy. Families, fans, Manilias that love this IP, they gotta like end this off in some way to make it just better than Frozen Empire. In other ways, make it just the last dance that you enjoy Ghostbusters like any other. And with that said, that concludes the whole review episode of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So pretty much nothing else to say. 6 out of 10, 3 stars. Not much to say. My most disappointing movies of the year so far during my movie going session of like 2024. So I wouldn't highly recommend this movie a lot, but I'd say give it a shot and just see what you think. That's all I can say. I can't say pretty much everything else to bring up, so that is going to be much for me from this review of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. As always, if you enjoy this episode and the show overall, if you've been listening to me for quite some time, follow and subscribe to whatever podcast you're listening on. I'm also on YouTube as well. So if you're listening on the podcast, you may not get the story, but I'm just in a room wall sided, but more YouTube content will be coming along the way for many people, for options for those that want to see what I look like. Usually I will bring guests here and then. So follow and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube if you want to get the look at my face and other stuff that I'll be getting to do in the future episodes of I Screen, You Screen 4, number 4 movies. Don't forget to follow my social media platforms at Twitter, X, and TikTok. They'll both be in the show notes of each episode. And don't forget to drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you are on Apple, or if you're not on Apple, I will happen to leave that in the in the description of each episode. To anyone else listening outside of the Apple Podcast, gotta drop those 5-star reviews if you really enjoy those reviews and helps listeners find the show. And to quickly cap this episode off on a high note, next episode, very exciting episode, Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, is coming out. Very stoked, very hyped, and I guarantee you, I'm gonna be really enjoying this more than Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So this is another episode to look out for if you are looking forward to hearing my thoughts on that movie. Just drop and just subscribe and just follow and subscribe to the podcast, whatever you're listening on, YouTube, of course. And I'll, of course, bring a returning guest from my last season. So everyone, stay tuned for that episode to drop. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dan Escamlaji, the host of I Screen, You Scream 4, number 4 movies. Until next time, stay screaming for the movies. Good night and peace.